Welcome to the Dynamics 365 Practice Show. Today we're going to dive into the Power Platform Adoption Framework with Andrew Welch. He's a Director of Business Applications and Automation Practice at AIS. Andrew has recently released a white paper on enterprise management and best practice for adopting the Power Platform at scale. But first, let's talk about drones. It's a proven fact that drone data can drive insights for business from utility companies monitoring assets to construction companies conducting roof inspections. There are so many possible use cases. However, there's one problem I often see with drone data. Once you've got the data, how do you store it and make it easy for people in your business to consume and share? Maptasker has solved that problem. They enable companies using Dynamics 365 to easily store and manage drone data, store it against a record within Dynamics 365, and even build workflows using that data. It's perfect for any organization that leverages the power of drone data in their business. For more information on how you can maximize the value of drone data, visit maptasker.com and contact the team for a demo. Now, let's get on with the show. Remember, full show notes for this episode will be at nz365guide.com/122. Andrew, welcome to the Dynamics 365 show.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me, and I'm super excited for everyone who's going to take part in this. So thank you.
Awesome. Although it's on the Dynamics 365 show, it preceded the Power Platform show, but a lot of what we're going to talk about today, of course, is around Power Platform adoption and the Power Platform adoption framework that you've been developing. So, but before we get underway with that, can you give me a bit of your background? What part of the world do you hail from?
Yeah, so I live in Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., here in the U.S., and I sort of have grown up in a few different places in the U.S., so I consider a little town outside of Boston to be my hometown, and my family comes from Sweden, so I've got a lot of wonderful family and wonderful cousins back in Sweden, and I try to make it over there 4 or 5 times a year, and yeah, but it's kind of the Northeast United States with roots over there.
Mm-hmm.
So to speak.
And so do you do a lot of travel?
It's a sort of a wondrous thing. I saw one of my good friends here at the office today, and I actually walked into my office, and my office mate sort of looked up at me as if he was surprised to see me. So yeah, whether it's kind of for work or for getting out in the community around Power Platform and Dynamics, or whether it's to see family or whatever, I kind of get antsy if I go longer than a few days without having been on a plane.
Wow, so you're still enjoying it then, the travel?
I do. Actually, to be honest, I don't know if I've ever enjoyed what I'm doing professionally so much as I'm enjoying it now. This is such an exciting time with Power Platform and such amazing people. And
yeah, so true.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us, in Virginia, what do you get up to when you're not working?
Well, a lot of people don't know, actually, that Virginia is, I think this is the right number, the 5th largest wine-producing state in the U.S. So there's about 300 wineries that are all within, you can start to get to them within 45 minutes of Washington, D.C. So there are very few places where you can drive from a big capital city out and very quickly be in the countryside. So I love to spend time out there and love to meet new people, not just in Virginia, but kind of around the world in the wine industry. I think that wine is such an amazing way to experience parts of the world and to think about sort of nature in a way that, tech geeks like me don't normally get the chance to do.
So true, so true. So that leads us into Wine 30 Flight. Tell me more. Tell me more.
Oh, you do your research. Yeah. So Wine 30 Flight is my wife and my more like wine and travel blog. We realized a couple of years after we got married that we were both big wine geeks and big airplane geeks. So we tried to bring these two things together. But Wine 30 Flight, it's primarily a wine blog. I have not actually gotten a lot of chances to write on it recently, in the very recent past, because I've been writing about Power Platform or working on a book actually as well. So it's sort of hard to mode switch between writing about Power Apps and working on a book, and then all of a sudden I'm going to do short form writing about wine. So I'm hoping to get back to it, but wine30flight.com is the blog.
Okay, so tell me about the book.
The book. Yeah, I've thought a lot about how to describe this, and kind of what I've arrived on is this idea of, it's sort of a contemplation of where we are in this moment of, I think, kind of, I don't want to say global upheaval, because I don't want to overplay it, but it's a work of fiction, it's a novel. I just finished writing it, and I'm finishing with the editing now, but essentially it follows a group of folks in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s, some of them whom have gotten into the software business, some of whom have done other things in their lives, and they're sort of struggling with, they're from, some of them are American, some of them are European, there's an Australian, there's an Egyptian there, but sort of struggling with this idea of, in this interconnected world, and these disputes that we're having with one another in a societal standpoint, how do we connect with our roots, and how do we connect with the people back home and in our hometowns, and how do we navigate this big interconnected world while still preserving a sense of interpersonal commitment to one another, and family, and friendships, and that type of thing. So I'm hoping to be able to share it here in the next few months, actually.
Wow, awesome. So you're self-publishing or going through a publisher?
I kind of haven't decided. I have a publisher with whom I'm talking, and we'll see where that goes. I certainly, just like most of us who sit down and bang out a new app because we had a great idea in the middle of the night. 99% of us who do that are not coming up with the next Uber as we do that, and I have no illusions that I got to be pretty good in order to get someone to publish my novel. So hopefully it'll succeed. If not, I'll share it with the world, and if folks like it, that's wonderful. And if not, at least I kind of feel like I did a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. My wife wrote a book 18 months ago, and we self-published it. And I think it's a brilliant experience to understand how it works. But of course, what publishers do bring is the marketing channel. But, everybody I've read that's written tech books in our industry have never, even via publishers, it's a lot of work. And I take my hat off to people that write books. It just seems so much work.
This one, it's funny, I struggled with this one. I started writing in June, actually, of last year, of 2018. So it's set contemporarily. So it's set actually all in 2018. And my cousin and I, we were sitting at one of my favorite wine bars in Stockholm. And he said, we were talking about writing books, and I said, yeah, I kind of want to write a tech book. And then sometimes I think maybe I'd like to write a wine book. And sometimes I also have this idea for a story. And he looked at me and he said, bro, why don't you write all three in one? And it was like the most brilliant idea I'd ever heard. But it's true, though, when it comes to working on these things, I wrote probably 120 pages between June and December of last year. And then I said, I'm going to treat this like I treat working on a project, right? So I just started I said, you know what, Saturdays I go to the coffee shop, I go to the cafe, and I write. And I wrote, more than doubled the amount I wrote in the next 3-4 months after that. So you really got to commit to it.
Yeah, so true, so true. I take my hat off to you for, and I hope you get it out there before too long. That'll be awesome. One last question before we drill into the Power Platform framework or adoption framework, and that is, do you have a favorite destination?
Do I have a favorite, like a favorite travel destination?
Yeah. Country, could be country, city, whatever. Yeah.
So for a very long time, I've been very, very fond of Madrid, Spain. But I have to tell you, I think that Stockholm, Sweden might be one of the most beautiful cities in the world. So someone asked me about this the other day, and I said, in no particular order. I don't know. I'd say Madrid, Stockholm, London, DC, Boston, New York. They're all great cities, but I'm definitely a city guy.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you been to Madrid in the middle of summer?
Actually, July is the only month that I have never been to Madrid, which is sort of funny since a big chunk of that aforementioned book takes place in Madrid in July, just the way the chips fell. But yeah, I've been there and it's been pretty hot.
Okay. Now, I wasn't going to ask you one more question on this, but I've got to. How are you portraying that Australian?
I'll send you an excerpt, but the way I've at least she's not one of the major principal characters in the book, but she pops up a few different times, and I've tried to really portray her as kind of thoughtful, strong, but strong to the point where she doesn't need to fill the world with, she didn't need to fill the space in the conversation with a ton of words. So I actually really like her as a character, and I'll leave it ambiguous as to how she ends up in the end.
I know this is going to get me in trouble, but I don't think you know any Australian woman, mate.
No, you know what? Actually, I do.
Because it's normally the other way around. They're full of words and not very thoughtful. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that.
So, you know what? Actually, one of my very best friends, she's in the Australian Air Force, and she's my next door neighbor, and she's one of my very best friends. We do a lot together, and she always has something to say, and I always find what she has to say to be very, worthy and worth listening to. And I sort of wrote this character as a sort of a, at least I was trying to be clever, sort of as a contrarian opposite of what you might expect.
Gotcha. And by the way, those listeners from Australia that are married to fine Australian women or dating fine Australian women, I was no offense, right? It was just a Kiwi having a crack at an Australian. That is all. No flaming me for that comment. Anyhow, we digress and move on. Power Platform Adoption Framework. This is a white paper that you've been working on, I understand. Tell us a bit about where the concept kind of came from.
Yeah, so I was having a conversation, and I think I should disclaim, first of all, that one of the things that I think has been so neat about what's happened in Power Platform in over the last year is that it's brought a number of different communities that always sort of existed near one another, but it's brought a number of different communities together. So we've got folks who come from a Dynamics background or from a BI background. We've got some SharePoint folks here, and when I go around the world and I talk to my friends and new friends and old friends and everything around the world, one of the things we talk about, and inevitably there's a mention of, wow, I didn't know most of these people 12 months ago, 18 months ago. And I think that's because Microsoft has really done a wonderful thing here in bringing all of these different practitioners together in a way that has made us all better, right? So let me disclaim all of this by saying that I come from a Dynamics background. Right. I love Microsoft Dynamics. I've been a big, long-time believer in it. And, we spent a long time trying to spoof Dynamics into being what we always wanted Power Platform to become. So anyway, that's just a little bit about my perspective on this. So it was back the second half of last year where I think we were having a lot of conversations, and I remember specifically one conversation I was having with someone at Microsoft, and we were talking about how too many organizations are still, even big organizations, they're still viewing Power Apps as an app. They're still viewing it as, I have a use case that I need to solve, or I have an app that I need to modernize, and I'm going to get Power Apps. And they get very into this idea that it's just an appism. It's this idea that I'm going to solve this one problem and then move on. And we were talking about how that equals so much unrivaled, unrealized potential. So the problem that we set out to try to solve, and this was originally with some folks, talking with some folks from Microsoft and talking with my team at Applied Information Sciences. And so the problem we originally set out to solve was, how can we help big organizations adopt Power Platform at scale? Our perspective was, my perspective was from a Dynamics background, but we really quickly realized that we needed to make this, I think, more of a community effort. So we took all the ideas that we had written down and that I had put together into the original draft of this white paper and that we were using to deliver for our clients here at AIS. And I just started sending it to people. I sent it to friends. I sent it to Microsoft customers. I sent it to Microsoft people. I even sent it to competitors, folks who work at other partners. And I said, hey, what do you think of this? How can we make this we need some best practices around the platform. The best practice I'm trying to solve for here is how do large enterprise organizations scale the platform? So how can we make this really, really valid and really, really relevant to folks so they can just pick it up and all of us are playing off the same sheet of music and we have this sort of emerging global standard as to how to go about one of these implementations.
So that was the starting point of it.
Yeah. I mean, I maybe got a little carried away. I'm sorry.
No. So who's got involved with it? So AIS, who you work for, is obviously one of the key stakeholders, and yourself. Who else? More from the community, not so much Microsoft side. Any names that you could throw out there?
Well, I don't think I'm giving too much away since I have been blogging and tweeting my thanks and gratitude to them. So certainly Manuela Pichler from from Virgin Atlantic, and Keith Watling. So actually, there's a lot of folks in London. So Manuela and Keith Watling and Lee Baker and Lucy Muscat, and some folks might be familiar with Yash Agarwal in Hyderabad, India. He's certainly one of my favorite collaborators. He's very technical, so he's always good to kind of refer a tough technical problem to. But yeah, that's sort of been those folks who I just mentioned in London. They've sort of been my chief co-conspirators in this.
Wow, so that's over half of your conspirators are all from the motherland. Britain.
Hey, bring back Queen. The Queen. Bring back the Queen. Don't tell anyone I said that, even though everyone will know now that I said it on a podcast. So.
Have you ever watched Little Britain?
I've seen it very occasionally, but yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to watch the US one without first watching the British one, because it is just so awesome.
It's funny that you say that, because my wife she always gets, when we fly, because we live right next to, I'm 4 minutes away from an American Airlines hub, so it's really easy for me. So we often fly on One World carriers.
Yep.
My wife gets so excited when we're flying on British Airways, because she is absolutely convinced that British comedy far outstrips anything that's available elsewhere in terms of dry sense of humor. So she gets really excited about the onboard entertainment on British Airways.
100%. Why do you think they get Ricky Gervais to, headline so many of the Oscars? And is it the Oscars he's done or the Emmys? I can't remember. But year after year, they bring him back because he's so funny.
Yep. Well, and if you really want to, at least, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if you really want to crack yourself up, the only enduringly funny airline safety video that I know is the one played on British Airways. And I'm always that guy sitting there on the plane laughing for the 25th time at that video, but it's well done.
You still watch safety videos on airlines?
Only that one, because it cracks me. When he looks and he says, "You're playing someone who's very interested in seatbelts." I don't know. It gets me every time. It's so dumb, but it gets me every time.
Classic. So give us a bit of background on AIS.
Well, AIS, Applied Information Sciences, the company is based in Reston, Virginia, just outside of DC. We've got offices all around the US and an office in Hyderabad, India, that office is far nicer than my office. So it's sort of sometimes I wish I was working there, right? But in any case, yeah, we've been a Microsoft Gold partner since the early 90s, since the beginning of the partner program. And for the last several years, we've been actually the number one Azure partner in the US by consumption volume. And we decided, so I've worked here since late 2017, and what the company really decided was that, hey, we made this big bet on Azure, we need to be looking at what's next. And the conclusion was Power Platform. We think it's really exciting, and I've basically been given the opportunity here to go out and say, all right, we've done work in Dynamics in the past, but we're going to build a business applications practice from the ground up, and it's going to be Power Platform native. The focus is Power Platform, and that includes Dynamics, but we're going to go about this from a very Power Platform, the whole platform. How can we do this adoption at scale perspective? And it's been really neat to be able to build a team freshly around Power Platform. It's been an amazing experience.
Yeah, so you're one of the people that are getting it. I see so many Dynamics partners out there that head still buried in the sand. It was interesting today, Microsoft sent an email that I got, and it said, update to the Online Service Usage Incentive Program, OSU, for FY20. And what I like in here, it says, let me just go back to it 1 second. I'll just bring up specifically what it says, because I found it very, very interesting in that it says, we have blah, blah, blah. On the 1st of October 2019, we'll break the OSU program into 3 separate incentive programs covering Modern Workplace, MW, Dynamics, DYN, and Power Platform, PP. And so, we've had Office 365 and Dynamics around for some time, but this is a clear step to really show that the Power Platform is their future. And I think it's, I heard an illustration today. It's like when, the young kid all of a sudden grows up really physically tall against the older brother, and you're like, wow, where did that come from? And it's like, although kind of Power Platform came from an underpinning of Dynamics world, it is becoming rapidly so much more than what Dynamics 365 is.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of my favorite topics to sort of banter about, and that's that, in a way, Power Platform and Power Apps specifically began as the child of Dynamics, but
Yeah.
the apprentice of Dynamics, but now the in a way the apprentice is now the master.
Exactly.
And this is, like I said earlier, I'm a Dynamics guy. I've been a big believer in Dynamics for a long time, even when no one wanted to listen to guys like us who have been
Yeah,
lovers of
yeah,
Dynamics
yeah.
for a long time. And I think that the best thing that Microsoft ever did for Dynamics was to stop talking about Dynamics and start talking about Power Platform, because now what they've done, and people don't get, a lot of people I think don't get this. So I'm always very happy to share this idea and watch people's eyes, but that Dynamics, for the most part, Dynamics is a Power App now. There's some exceptions to this, but Dynamics is a big Power App that Microsoft happens to have built.
Yeah, you're
So
spot on.
yeah, and when I go into particularly when I'm talking to a new client or a new organization that they're interested in Power Apps or Power Platform, and I ask them, well, do you have Dynamics? And some of them say yes, and I say, well, you don't know this, and I got to attribute this to Chris Huntingford, but I say, you don't know this, but you're already Power Apps developers because you already are on Dynamics. And
Yeah.
the point is that I think that we all need to change our mindset from going in and saying, hey, Dynamics is the solution to this problem, to instead saying Power Platform is the solution to this problem, and Dynamics might be the specific route that we take if it meets the needs that we're trying to solve. But I think we all need to stop leading, whether you're in a sales role or whether you're in an architect role or whatever role you're in. I think that everyone needs to stop leading with this idea, oh, Dynamics is the answer to your problem, and embrace the idea that Dynamics might be the answer to your problem, but Power Platform has given us the capability to do so much more beyond what we were able to do with Dynamics.
So true, so true. So looking at the Power Platform framework, in the document that you've released, can you kind of give me a summary of kind of what you're addressing in it and why, who's the target audience and why they should go read that?
Yeah, so let's start with the target audience. I think that, to me, the target audience is, there's two of them really. They are business decision makers, right, who are trying to who are trying to do one of two things. They're trying to wrap their mind around what the technology is and how they might be able to apply it to solve a problem that they have. But also, and I think this is actually more important, to convey the sense that folks are out there thinking about and testing and proving out and continually improving the way that we do this, thinking about how to do this, how to adopt the platform at scale in a best practices driven, rigorous, responsible way, right? So I think that if you're a business decision maker, you want to look at this, whether you're an in-house developer or whether you're trying to sell, you work for a partner and you're trying to sell your services, what you're really in a lot of cases doing is trying to convey that, hey, this thing is for real, and there's a lot of people thinking about how to do this in a best practices driven way. So that's, I think, one audience. The other audience, of course, are the people who are actually going to go do the work, right? Those are the folks who are going to, again, and it usually ends up being a combination. It ends up being a partnership between the customer, the company who's implementing it. So I know some in-house developers and gurus around Power Platform who I hope that they're looking at this and they're using it. And it's the partners who they choose to bring in to help them with that journey. And it's also Microsoft, the folks from Microsoft who are, kind of trying to lay out what you're going to do with these licenses and why there's an ROI, a return on investment on those licenses, and why this is a bet that you should make. So I'm hopeful that not just the people making the decisions will read this and say, oh, cool, but also the people who are doing the work will read it and say, this is how we're all going to speak the same language about doing this at scale.
Yeah, I like it. And so the two audiences, business decision makers, and then the people doing the implementation. And I think that's probably a very key one there, right? A lot of people have struggled with, how do you provide governance and also, a framework for adopting this new technology where you've got a lot of citizen developers producing, apps that haven't come from a technologist type background. So how do large businesses, how do they adopt at scale this type of framework?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, let me back up, and there are two kind of words that I want to key on, because I do think sometimes words really mean something, and that's that we made a conscious decision to call this an adoption framework and not to call it an implementation methodology, so to speak. And I think that Maybe a lot of people don't get the subtlety of this, but I think that with Power Platform, we really need to think of this as being an adoption rather than an implementation. To me, an implementation is something that you hire some consultants, they come in, they do the thing, they teach you what the thing is, and then they leave, and then, oh, hooray, it's implemented. But an
Mm-mm.
adoption needs to be much more cultural. It needs to be much more about a journey rather than a thing that we're going to do for the next 6 months, right?
Yeah, yeah. I like that. I like that. What you're doing is really shifting people's point of view on how they approach us.
Yeah, and people need to. And it's not necessarily because the old way is bad, but it's because we can do so much better. And I think as a community, we all, whether you're Microsoft or whether you're a partner or whether you're a customer, I think we all need to say, hey, we've been doing all right, but we can do so much better. And we have this great technology available to us, and we need to rise to the occasion for the organizations that we serve so that their experience with this wave of software adoption is better and exceeds anything they've ever done before. So adoptions, not implementations.
Okay, so of the people or the organizations that you're dealing with, that you're working with, that let's say they have no understanding of dynamics, so that's not, if you like, baggage, if you like, or in the way they're
Right.
thinking. And I don't mean any offense in the way I position that. Remember, I've been doing dynamics for a long time as well, listeners. But what I'm saying is that you're going into an organization. Do you see this really as more of a DevOps type journey, the Power Platform and Power App development flow, Power BI implemented within a business, rather than going in, putting in a point solution? It's a route, it's a key tool, if you like, in digital transformation.
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? And we struggle with that because for a lot of reasons. I think that this is more of a DevOps type approach. And I when I say that, actually, I hope I'm not scaring folks with less of a technical background off on that, because I think that DevOps is, yes, there's a lot of technique and there's a lot of tooling around that from a technical perspective, but I also think that this is a bit of a mindset thing. And I think a good example of this is that I was talking with an organization about adopting the platform, and their particular problem was that they allegedly have thousands and thousands of access databases sitting out there that have a lot of stuff in them. They don't necessarily know what it's doing or anything. And they said, well, don't you have a tool that can just inventory all of these databases and convert them, rebuild them with a tool into the common data service? And I said, well, one, no. And two, I don't even think that would be advisable. And I think that it's partly because people have a tendency to think of these migrations, whether you're coming from, a big legacy, custom dev thing monstrosity, or ERP, or legacy CRM, or whether you're coming from those quasi apps, Access, InfoPath, Excel, whatever it might be. There's a tendency to think of, well, I have one Access database, so clearly that's going to equal one app on Power Platform. And the answer is, I just think that that's not correct, because a lot of times we make choices early on based on the technology that we have. So we say, we're going to do this in this way in this Access database, and we have to make compromises, right? And that's fundamentally what a lot of technical debt is. It's the compromises that we've made over time in order to bend ourselves to the technology rather than the other way around. So when you start talking about migrating and modernizing an organization in the cloud, what you're really looking at is you're saying, okay, I have this one Access database or this one InfoPath library that might itself spawn 5 Power Apps and maybe some Power BI. Maybe I shouldn't even be doing this in Power Apps at all. Maybe this is really more of a Power BI problem, or maybe it's a combination of the two, or maybe you have 5 Access databases and 12 spreadsheets, and for security reasons over the years, they've been kept separate, and you've been doing a lot of copying and pasting and shooting things back and forth. Maybe all those things need to become one app. So I think that kind of taking this from a business perspective, kind of from a continuous improvement perspective, where we're saying, rather than, we're just going to automate the whole thing, it's really a question of sitting down with your business owners and kind of getting with them. And this is what the framework tries to move to the front and center, this idea of getting from them and understanding from them what problems they're trying to solve, how we should prioritize the solving of those problems, what the correct technology choices are, and then move from there rather than saying, I've got this Access database, let's turn it into a Power App.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like, you talk there about, DevOps can be a freaky term, which comes from, developer becoming operational and an iterative cycle of, which is, it doesn't need to be technical, right? It doesn't need to be over top, because we can easily say this as, citizen developers, which at the end of the day are subject matter experts, not technologists, that find a tool set, in this case, Power Apps, Power BI, and Flow, and it allows them to configure, build, create solutions that really move the dial inside their businesses when it becomes to, digitizing processes, making things work the way people expect them to work, that type of thing. And then moving that across to become operational. In other words, there's a support infrastructure for the apps, the software, whatever's built is maintainable over time. And that if people leave the organization, the app still runs. In other words, it has some operational structure that any enterprise business would want to see at their application. So I see it from that point of view, not the technical, a bunch of .NET developers and, then IT pros in the admin side of the organization operationalizing it as such. So that makes sense to me. So what are the key tenets of the framework you've developed?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I do have a question I want to ask you here. That's something you made me think of, but we'll come back to that here in a moment. So basically, the idea here is that when we set out to do this, we were trying to, as I said, solve this problem of how large organizations can adopt this thing at scale. But we wanted to kind of keep some things in the foreground, right? A lot of times whenever you get to a point with technology, with a new technology where you're starting to talk about frameworks and that type of thing, there's a real risk that you're going to put people in a box where, hey, we've been at it for 6 months and all we've produced is a document, a lot of documents actually, and that's because that's what the framework told us, right? So we wanted to not do that here. I talk a lot about we're still trying to get to value quickly, right? So if you talk about sort of the principles here, it's about getting to value quickly. It's about, and that means getting that first workload out there within weeks, not months or years.
Exactly.
Part of this is about educating and not just educating, but nurturing that community within the organization. So thought of another way, we've got these user groups, these great user groups all around the world that practitioners and subject matter experts in the technology, but what we're really doing inside of a big organization, particularly inside of a big, global multinational company or even a big government agency, is we're kind of building a user group within that organization, right? A place where they can come and talk about the specific problems that organization faces and how to apply this technology to solve them. So I think another really key tenet is nurturing and growing that community within the organization.
Yeah.
Another concept here is creating durable partnerships between the business and IT and that user community. So we've seen, I think, the old way of doing this type of business was that IT would cook something up and bring it to the business and say, hey, what do you think of this? What we're seeing with Power Platform is very often now it's actually the business, the operational side of the equation that's really driving the enthusiasm and the interest and, frankly, oftentimes the money around adopting this thing. So it's creating those partnerships. Another key tenet, and kind of after I share some of these kind of guiding principles, I'll get into how the thing works. But is this idea of if you go to if you look at it from an Azure perspective, right? In the Azure part of the world, the more you consume, the more you use, the more you pay. But in the Power Platform side of the equation, actually you're incentivized to use it more because you're going to make that investment. And the per app licensing that's coming out in October, I think changes this equation. It doesn't change the equation fundamentally, but it maybe adds some nuance to it. But if you're at that what we call now a P2 license, but what's going to be called, the per user license, you're going to make that investment. And that's what the organization is going to pay for licensing, no matter how many workloads they have in there, right? So if you make that license investment and your users are on average each using one app per day or one app per week, the cost of that app, the cost of that workload is whatever the cost of the license was. So the more we migrate onto the platform, the more we can divide, the more the per workload cost goes down, and also the more likelihood you have that you can start to retire licensing costs for legacy systems or support and maintenance costs for legacy systems. So the bottom line is that Power Platform, the more you use it, the better value you get, which is not, which is a little bit of a different type of scenario. And then the final concept here is that, yeah, we can build what I call localized productivity apps. So those are the apps that I'm going to build, and it's going to solve a problem for me, or it's going to solve a problem for my team, and maybe I'm building it on SharePoint, or with Power Apps on SharePoint, or maybe I am going to use CDS a bit here, but also that this is a really robust platform that we can build really, really meaty things on top of. So at AIS, we're working with a big international, these are multinational Fortune 100 type companies, to help them use the platform to manage cost sharing and cost allocation across all of their many, thousands of different locations all around North America or all around the world, or how they can use this to use Power Platform, and they can automate how they bring new products to market, particularly in, financial services where you got a lot of regulation, or say industry or travel or transportation, these highly regulated industries. There's the business process automation capability here goes so far beyond those localized productivity apps. So I think it's really important to focus both on what the quote unquote citizen developer can do, and I want to come back to that, but also focus on what we can do at the enterprise level to really make this thing worthwhile for a big organization. So those are sort of the principles, the guiding principles here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell me about the next layer down.
So the next layer down is the nuts and bolts of how do you actually do this thing? Like, principles are great, but how do you do this? So the approach that we take is the approach that the framework takes, is that you begin with a really focused effort, a really focused engagement. So we always kind of debate back and forth, should we call this the discovery phase, which we think sort of helps people who are old school maybe feel a little more comfortable with it, or should we call this thing a quick start? So expect in the second edition, we might address exactly what this is called, but the bottom line is that what we're talking about is 1 to 2 months. I think 6 weeks is usually the sweet spot, but in that period, there's a lot of activity, right? So you're designing the prototype, you're identifying the prototype workload, all right? So you're saying, this is what we're going to migrate first. You're co-designing it. So the age of where we, the software gurus would kind of listen to the business people talk and write down their requirements and then go off into the dark and design the thing and come back to them. No, we don't do that anymore. Now we design. You don't ever want to design without the business. You want those end users there. You want those stakeholders there. So
yeah, 100%.
We design the prototype, you build the prototype, you time box yourself. You say, listen, what can we get done in 2-3 sprints maximum? Because if not, the temptation to go off and say, oh, well, just one more thing, just one more sprint is just so great. So you're building in this initial period, you're building the prototype of that first workload. You are staging app in a day, or it could be dashboard in a day, or flow in a day, or a combination of all the above. You're trying to begin nurturing that community of folks in the organization. You're getting them set up with community environments, or those one-off sandboxes so they can go play, and you're trying to kind of laying the groundwork. You're also, are facilitating these stakeholder work groups, right? And I know that sounds like sort of consulting nonsense, but what I'm really getting at is that you're really rolling up your sleeves and you're looking at, okay, what do we have from a dynamics perspective? Do we already have dynamics here? How can we ensure that what we already have in dynamics in the CDS is going to play well, with where we're going with Power Apps? Maybe you're already using Power BI. So what are the lessons learned around the community of Power BI? Or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe you're already using Power Apps and we can learn some things from that and translate that over to Power BI and to Flow. But it's just the idea of getting all the right people in the room from business and IT and whiteboarding out what we want our enterprise management to look like, what we want our, how we're going to start mapping these workloads on and on and on. And the whole goal is to get enough information so that you can really create a plan and do some costing and some budgeting so the organization knows what they're getting into around, say, maybe the next 12 months as we continue to migrate workloads. And you're moving into what we call the 3 tracks. So once that initial effort is over, all right, you're kind of kicking off these 3 simultaneous tracks. So the first track is we call it right now the app build, but I think we'll probably, the next time we release an update to the framework, we'll call it something like the workload migration, because we want to be more inclusive of Power BI and of Flow. But basically, through track one, the app build, this is the actual act of migrating workloads. It's about building the components on the platform, whether it's an app, Power App or Flow or Power BI or modeling data in the CDS. This is about building components and getting them out so people can use them. Track two is road mapping. So that's about going out into the business and identifying, first of all, which parts of the business we want to focus on, but then working with those people to identify where their pain is, what the high priority workloads we're trying to migrate or the problems we're trying to solve for, to help them prioritize those, to make some good technology choices. Sometimes you're going to need to go outside a Power Platform and expand across Azure. And I think that those are the types of decisions that we make there. We're basically feeding that workload migration engine in track one. And then track three is what underlies the whole thing. That's enterprise management. That's the idea that we're, how do we manage, deploy, and govern this thing at an enterprise scale? And if you want, we can get into that further and some what the framework says about that. But that's fundamentally, it's about that initial kickoff, and then going into these three tracks that run simultaneously to one another.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. It's going to be good for people to get their hands on this. But before we discuss where listeners can grab it, what's your next step for the framework?
Yeah, so we've been kicking this around. There's a WhatsApp group we're always kicking this around on, and on Twitter as well. So join into the conversation. But some things that I think that we'll put out a second edition of the framework here before the end of the year, so sometime in the autumn. I'm looking at a few things. I think we're looking at how to make this more inclusive of Power BI, how to make this more inclusive of the other half of the family. Not to say that it isn't inclusive today and now, but I've sort of been on this kick lately that we need to, if we're going to say whole of platform, we need to really say whole of platform. And part of that is about eliminating, not calling track one an app build anymore, but also that's about really being more meaty with what we do with Power BI. So I think that's a priority. I continue to kick around this idea of, wow, is it really old fashioned of us to have a PDF, like to turn this into a book, basically, when, is there a better way to present this information to folks and to keep the best practices more current? So I think we're kicking that around and how to do that. I also think that, we say that the framework originally came out of AIS, and this company is committed to its continued development and to kind of really throwing our weight behind that. But I also sort of look at it and I say, well, it's one thing to be committed to it, and it's one thing to be the organization driving the framework forward. It's another thing to make this really inclusive of the community. So I think that in future iterations, you can expect less branding. I think you can expect, we don't want to distract from the really good content that we think is there. So that's on my list as well.
I like it. If listeners want to get a copy of the framework, if that's available now, how can they get a hold of it?
Yeah, so the best way to do it is if you go to my personal website where I, write and I blog on these topics, that's runwayview.com. So runwayview.com. And you can't miss it. There's a big link for Power Platform AF, Power Platform Adoption Framework there. And you can download it right from there. You can also go to AIS's website, which is appliedis.com. But and you can hit me up on Twitter as well, and I'm happy to send it to you. So there's a lot of different ways you can find it, but there you have it.
Awesome. Sounds good. So runwayview.com is where they can go get it. It's quite clear branding there around getting themselves a copy. That's fantastic. So to wrap up, some quick fire questions for you.
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. What's the one productivity tool that you cannot live without?
Todoist.
Todoist?
Yes. Don't tell everyone at Microsoft who heard me just say that, but yes, I'm a big Todoist addict, and I have been for a long time.
Wow. Is it like I've not used it, but is it a web app or is it an app that runs on your phone?
Both. So it's a task tracker, but you can get it through the browser. I've got an app actually downloaded on my desktop, and I've got it on my phone and my iPad, and I've built, and I keep meaning to blog about this, sort of a method for kind of going through a year, a quarter, a month, and a week. And I use Todoist for kind of helping me keep focused on what my big rocks that I need to move are. Otherwise, we're just going to get dragged down into the replying to this email or doing whatever. So Todoist is my go-to.
Sell it to me.
Sell you on Todoist?
Yeah.
It's easy to use task tracking, but it lets you write your own queries and your own filters within the app itself. So you can get really focused on what's my low hanging fruit. The way I look at it, what's my low hanging fruit? What can I accomplish in 3 minutes or less? So if I've got 9 minutes on my hands between meetings, I can go and I can knock 3 things out. And what I love about it, it's very basic task tracking, but you can make it your own because it lets you write your own kind of queries and build your own kind of interface and system around your own productivity.
Nice. I see it fully integrates with Zapper, If Then Then That, Amazon Alexa, Dropbox. And does it have any kind of templates for GTD, getting things done? Oh, look at that. I just went to the template section, the number one thing, GTD weekly review.
There you are.
I might have to check this out. Like I move from app to app,
Yes.
I don't have a loyalty to an app. If it's doing the right thing for me now, I move to it type thing. And I still use Evernote massively, even though OneNote came out after and stuff. I just find it does what it does for me the best. And so, I tend to use what works for me the best. The one I use is Things. But I've noticed that for about a month, I've not really used Things, which tells me perhaps it's not meeting my needs as much, so might be time for a change. All good. So ideal way you'd while away a weekend?
Gosh, I would have to say probably spending some time at my family's place up in Provincetown, Massachusetts. That's where part of my family's been since the 1890s. And,
Wow.
I go up there all the time just to visit family or to just to have some peace and quiet. I'm a big believer that even though I love cities and I love spending my time in cities, I think that all of us, particularly those of us who work in the industry that we work in, sometimes we got to unplug, and it really does
Totally.
you good to sit there and do some writing and just kind of watch the sea. That's for me.
Yeah. Hundertwasser, Austrian artists had a term called tree bathing, that everybody should go tree bathing and basically, just walk through a wooded area, and same thing kind of applies if you're out by the ocean, right? You get away from everything, and it's good for the soul.
Yep, absolutely.
What would you advise your younger self?
What would I advise my younger self? I would advise my younger self to not complain about stupid things so much. I don't know if I would have listened to it, but yeah, I think that, you kind of come up with a system that works for you, and you try to spend your time focused in that part of the world. There's the things that matter, and then there are the things that we can control, and we should try to spend as much of our time where those two things intersect. And too often we spend our time not where those two things intersect. And I just think that, figure out a way to be good at what you do and, spend time on things that matter and that you can control.
Nice. Who do you recommend as a guest for the podcast in future?
I feel like anyone I recommend, I'm going to leave off so many brilliant people, but I think I would.
Just one. I only want one. You can only select one.
All right. So I'm going to go with one of my just greatest friends in the community, and I think that she is such a luminary and just so amazing to hear from. So if you've not had Lucy Muscat on, you should have her on soon.
I've not had her on. Interesting. I thought you were going to say somebody I'd had on, but great idea. I love Lucy, and that's a good idea to get her on the show and put her in the spotlight, so to speak. Andrew, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do this? In other words, what are the socials that you're on?
Yeah, so the best ways to do it, and I'm going to issue a kind of a question or a challenge to folks, and this is something I want to hear from you about. But if you want to connect with me on anything, on Twitter, it's Andrew D. Welch, AndrewDWelch. You can also probably just find me using the hashtag PowerPlatformAF. Power Platform Adoption Framework, of course. Also on LinkedIn at Andrew D. Welch as well. And then if you really want to get visual with my travels, you can follow Wine30 Flight, WINE, the number 30 Flight, FLIGHT on Instagram as well. But please reach out and get in touch. And in particular, a question that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, have we oversold the phrase citizen developer. And I know this is controversial, but my question is, if you've got folks who have really put the time in and they've learned this technology and they're modeling data in CDS and they're building these beautiful and useful things, at what point are they developers? And I think that that's a really important question. And I think that when we talk about making people part of the family, maybe we've oversold the idea of citizen developers, because maybe the idea of being a developer is changing a little bit. So I'd love to hear from people on that question.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Dynamics 365 show. Full show notes can be found at nz365guy.com/122. I'm your host, Business Application MVP, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. Don't miss out anything about what I'm talking about, covering, etc. If you want to hear more, go to nz365guy.com and sign up to the latest news and updates. Bye for now.